Merci, David. Pat Carabray, Dushinikashun, Red River, Ostinia, Maka, Vancouver, Niwakinikwa. So my name is Pat Carabray. I'm the director of the School of Music and the Chan Center at the University of British Columbia. I'm a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation. I just said that I'm originally from Red River, Treaty 1, Winnipeg, and I now live in Vancouver. I want to give thanks to the traditional owners and caretakers of this land as we begin our session. It was interesting to have heard this morning the statement that no one owns the land. It was just a couple months ago that I was asked to comment on Julie Black's slight alteration to the words of "O Canada," and which I thought was fantastic and was quoted in a number of newspapers about that. But then it was weird. I got some hate mail afterwards, which just gave me a sense of how unsettled the world still is, and the issue that some people really think they own the land, and that became a really big issue for some people after that statement. And so I give thanks to the traditional caretakers of the land who make it possible for us to be here and do the things that we do. So this panel is about kind of changes in training, and all of us are involved in training in various ways. So I run a university music program, and I've been doing this for over 30 years, and it's been part of my job to explain to parents why going to music school is not a bad thing for their young folk, you know, and that they will learn a lot of things in a music school that will be beneficial to them. And so I'm a composer. I was composer in residence at the Winnipeg Symphony. It's been great to see some of my old colleagues here for 6 seasons. Part of that job was to program the New Music Festival of Winnipeg, but also to be the on-stage host for Musically Speaking and a number of other concerts throughout the season. So I have a long number of years that I worked with or have worked with orchestras and seen a lot of changes. Some of you may also know me from The Signal on CBC. I was a radio host for a couple of years. So again, had lots of experience programming and researching and trying to figure out where music has been going through all those years. And now I'm out at UBC and the Chan Center, where again, new changes are facing us in how we prepare young people for going out into the world and how we interact with our various audiences. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to pass the mic down.
Good morning. I'm Sean Earle, and I'm the CEO of Sistema Toronto. In addition to that role, I also teach at the University of Regina. Prior to those experiences, I was the Director of Artistic Administration for the Regina Symphony, as well as Education and Outreach. So I have that kind of admin side of the orchestra world as well. I spent many years, and still doing that, freelancing as a clarinetist, orchestral clarinetist, as well as teaching at the University of Virginia, University of Victoria, and Washington and Lee University as well. So that training aspect, and I was the principal clarinet of the Charlottesville Symphony. So I kind of see both sides and also that training aspect as well too.
I have my own mic, which does not work. Test.
I can see somebody running back to you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, my name is Abigail Richardson Schulte. I'm a composer, and I'm composer in residence for the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. I've been in this position for 10 years now. And before that, I was affiliate composer with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. About 5 years ago at HPO, we started a composer fellowship program, which is why I'm on this panel today. We recognize that a lot of emerging composers went through school, studied how to do their craft, but really didn't have a sense of how things went in the real world. So as composer in residence, I host pre-concert talks, I have a number of series, I'm doing a lot of work out in the community, maybe live streaming and directing the video team, doing education, hosting concerts and events. Really, so we thought this is a nice opportunity to pass this along to emerging composers. So we typically have 2 a year, under 25 and older 25. And the program is going very, very well.
Sure. So hi everybody, my name is Christy Gray. I am the CEO of Orchestras Canada, and previous to that, I was the executive director at Sistema Toronto. I've also been a member of the El Sistema USA Equity-Centered Pedagogy Working Group, and I'm a board member now at Sistema Toronto and also a network steward at the Sistema Canada Network. Nice to see lots of familiar faces in the room today. So my background really is in education and music education. I had a lot of years at the Royal Conservatory of Music, working in community development and curriculum development. And my years at Sistema Toronto were really focused on equity-centered music education, making music education available for underserved communities, especially underserved children and youth. And now with my role at the National Youth Orchestra of Canada, you know, I'm really interested in what are the pathways to excellence for young people? How can we increase access for young people, especially young people from underserved communities, and what are those pathways to excellence? How are we defining excellence? These are big questions we've been talking about a lot within NYO, but also I think in the community in general. How can we address pathways to excellence and success and defining success for young people? So I'm really excited to be part of this group and have this discussion.
Now, I don't know if we can hear Marie-France, so I'll ask her to say a few words of introduction as well.
Oui, bonjour. Alors, je suis Marie-France Mathieu, directrice artistique et fondatrice de l'Orchestre Philharmonique de la Relève du Québec. Alors, étant la représentante francophone sur ce panel, j'ai décidé de parler dans ma langue première, le français. L'Orchestre Philharmonique de la Relève du Québec est un orchestre qui est basé dans la capitale nationale à Québec et qui soutient les musiciens émergents dans le développement de leur carrière. Alors, on le fait notamment à travers nos activités artistiques qui sont les concerts et nos séries aussi hors volet. Et aussi, on a un volet de formation continue que nous mettons en place depuis quelques temps et qui va se prolonger au fil des prochaines années. Pour nous, c'est important que nos musiciens puissent se développer dans un contexte professionnel puisqu'ils le sont déjà. Alors, nous accordons une grande priorité à leur rémunération et aux conditions de travail aussi dans un cadre professionnel, mais aussi dans un cadre harmonie. Et j'ai bien hâte de pouvoir discuter avec mes collègues sur le sujet d'aujourd'hui.
Merci. Okay, so we have identified 3 general topics that we're going to kind of speak to, and then we'll have some opportunity for some discussion at the end, hopefully. I'll just tell you what the 3 topics are. The first is, what does a career in music look like now? Because we think it's changing. The second is around diversity and inclusivity. No big surprise there. And the third is around financial support for training, because we've identified some gaps that probably exist. So I'll begin just by saying, as I mentioned in my introduction, a lot of what I've done over my career is speak to parents and then eventually speak to students about what their lives might look like after they're done music training. You know, and we've done some surveys of our graduates at the University of British Columbia, and the vast majority of them have some kind of a mixed income. They're not usually sole sourcing. I mean, we certainly have a number of graduates who go off and play with orchestras, and that's their main focus. But a lot of our graduates are in the musical community doing a variety of things. It may be teaching, they're working for small organizations, they're gigging in various contexts, they're working across cultural divides of various kinds with different kinds of musicians. And, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out how our training can change to address those needs. We also have a large, probably a 50% attrition rate out of music, period, from the beginning all the way through. And that's at each stage. And I know from my experience in other circumstances, even at Juilliard, 50% of the graduates don't end up in music. So, you know, we're a great pathway to law or medicine or MBA or whatever else, you know, healthcare, other services that people go into. And so the role of training institutions is not just to, as someone said to me the other day, make the sausage in that one long line, but to try and help people be ready for a changing world where their jobs may change, where the things that they thought they were going to do may disappear and new things are going to appear, and how they're going to adapt to those different environments. So certainly as our students in orchestra learned the repertoire, they're now also looking at a much more diverse repertoire. They're looking at new skills that they have to acquire, whether that's improvisation, working in a non-concert hall environment, doing concerts, a whole variety of things that never used to be part of the training of someone in an orchestra program. And so there's a lot of new things that get added on, which means that there's no more time in the degree, so there's probably less time preparing for the auditions that they might have to take and all of those things. And auditions is certainly something we'll talk about further. So I'll pass down.
So yeah, in terms of careers, what it looks like in music now, from my perspective at Sistema, that's not the end goal. Social development is the primary goal in using music to provide that social development for young people. But of course, if there is someone who wants to move forward and is interested in a career in music, we certainly have the capacity to do that. However, in other roles, working with orchestra and working with university, in the university setting, I've really seen I guess that trajectory that that young people and students take towards the orchestra. And what I've found is interesting conversations, especially with students, where there's nothing else on the radar. If that makes any sense, it's like, oh, I have to play. It's like, well, I'm here teaching you, and I'm not playing. Like, I'm not actively playing right now. There are certainly a variety of viable options, and it seems post-university, I always describe it as after I finished my master's, I had great reads and could play amazing. No one was calling me, right? So you had to find something else to do, right? In some way to be active. So employ those entrepreneurial skills and transferable skills, one, to make a living and make a life, but also as well to be artistically fulfilled and feel like, hey, I did this degree and it makes sense that I did it. So what I see, a career in music, it's typically after that education period and after that training period that students start to realize the other options that are out there for them. However, it seems like almost a disservice to them at times, the kind of that trajectory where orchestra is that kind of that primary focus, where a student or anyone can make a meaningful contribution to their community and musical community, and it doesn't have to be strictly playing. I found I make a bigger impact as an administrator, much bigger impact as an administrator, rather than as a musician in the orchestra, and that feels a whole lot better for my soul. Don't get me wrong, I still like to play. But I think in that training kind of stage, we should be looking at a holistic approach in a variety of career options, not just that kind of, not just that orchestra training, but also you can be an administrator, you can be an educator, you can be a music therapist. There's all sorts of things that you can do with a music career, or what I love is providing skills for lifelong engagement with music so that we have audiences for towards the future as well too. But I really, especially in this role, really think about the viability of an orchestra position, an orchestra role, especially that, like the pay. It's like, how does one sustain themselves off of the pay? I see jobs for 20,000, 30,000 a year. It's like, okay, you're gonna have to do something else too, right? And that's where those transferable skills come in, and I think that's where training institutions really have that social development side to provide soft skills and even hard skills for a viable life, not just a musical life, because we play music, but we also do other things like family, and you want a car and 2.5 kids and that sort of thing. How do you afford that, and how do you move forward on $30,000 a year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to it from a composer perspective. I mean, I think composers throughout history have done a number of things. They've been performers, they've been conductors, they've been composers and teachers often. So that hasn't changed. That's definitely, I think, what we are today. But for me in university, I did my grad work at University of Toronto, and now I teach there. The focus was on being a composer and learning my craft, and also learning to teach other composers, or to teach theory, and that was really about it. And when I got out into the real world, it was just completely different. And I'll use my position with the HPO as an example. I didn't realize as a composer that I have to talk about the works of other composers and composers from the past and know history and sort of turn myself into a musicologist. That's a lot of what I do. I didn't realize I'd ever have to play piano in front of people, because that's cut off in, second or third year undergrad. But here, I was starting to do presentations out in the community, and people said, "Are you going to play something for us?" And I looked in their eyes and said, "Yes, okay, fine. I'm picking up piano again." So here I go. I was talking to people of all different life stages and ages, and that is really part of it. And again, something that we don't really train our musicians for. So when I'm teaching students, I try to give them an idea of what it might be like in the real world and some of the things they might be doing, even just to try to widen their eyes when they're in undergrad, so that they might just say, okay, no, I want to be a piano performer and that's it. Or I want to be a composer, to say, wow, how about you push for that double major? Or what are you doing outside of music? Some of them are doing, physics or math or other things. And if they are in music, to try to give them the idea that in music, they don't just do one thing. Being a performer and a composer is great. Now let's talk about arts administration and what a huge world that is, and how that's actually a really great fit with composition. So yes, we can't do one thing anymore. At one point, I think I had 6 different positions. I'm now down to 3, which is great. Yeah, add them up, and this is what we do, and put on a different hat and go to a different place and do a different thing. That's the arts today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also maybe a bit of a generational change, right? Like, I think, I'm Gen X. I graduated from my BMS in 1999. And at that point, it was possible for me to put myself through my undergrad and work and pay my tuition and my rent and all that. I don't think that's really possible anymore. I don't think the landscape of housing and cost of living is at all the same as when I graduated. And I think it's good to sort of keep that in mind when we're talking to young people. It used to be that if you got a tenured position at an orchestra, you could probably buy a house in Toronto and raise a couple of kids. And that's not really possible anymore. And so when we're giving advice to young people, or we're thinking about programming for young people, we need to also take into consideration their point of view and also the world that they're living in now. What are the skills that they need now versus the skills that I might have needed when I graduated from my undergrad, or when I was in my early 20s? It's a lot different. And so, yeah, absolutely, those varied skills are super important. You're not likely, for instance, to get through a career as a musician, as a playing musician, without teaching. But we're not really doing much training and teaching right now in a lot of our programs, what we offer. It's something that young people will be almost for sure doing at some point in their careers. So where can we start to build those skill sets? Improvisation, freelancing, and a lot of those business skills, entrepreneurship, grant writing, managing a production, a lot of project management skills. Those are super important skills for active musicians. Some of us learn those on the job, but if you're not lucky enough to have had some education in those areas, is it really an even playing field for people who maybe wouldn't have the support to just pick up skills as they go along? So it's really something to think about. What skills are we focusing on beyond playing? And what are the pressures that young people are facing? If you have to take up all of those other skills in addition to being able to play the Don Juan excerpt, which I still have nightmares about, how difficult is it? How stressful is it? What are the pressures on mental health? And how are we really defining success for these young people? For me, when I was young, it used to be if you got a job, an orchestral job, you won the audition, you made it, and you were successful. And if not, then you were still working towards it and you hadn't made it yet. And that's not really the reality in the workplace anymore, in the field. And I think we end up with a whole cohort of young people who didn't make it, who are disappointed, maybe they feel shame, maybe they feel rejected from the field. And that's really a loss for the whole industry. It's a real loss for the entire sector. These are people who maybe don't go to concerts because they feel like they can't be connected to that world anymore. They're not engaged as teachers. They don't play in recreational music. And it is a real loss. So it's something we really want to think about. How do we define success? Who are we celebrating? And why are we celebrating some people and not others? Those are kind of my thoughts on what we're looking at around training for young people.
Marie-France, we can finally see you.
Oh, merci. Donc, voilà, nous, à l'Orchestre philharmonique nous sommes conscients que vraiment un marché dans la sphère musicale, qui définit aussi une carrière musicale. On observe aussi que plusieurs musiciens et musiciens en général se trouvent à plusieurs opportunités, comme mes collègues le disent aussi, que ce soit dans l'enseignement, dans une diversification de leur offre en tant que musicien, mais aussi parfois même vers un deuxième emploi dans un domaine tout autre que les arts pour être capable de continuer à subvenir à leurs besoins et, comme on dit aussi, d'atteindre nos buts personnels, familiaux aussi. Dans cette optique-là, on essaie vraiment d'ouvrir des opportunités à nos musiciens. Par exemple, dans nos activités, on les ouvre et on leur montre différentes façons d'aborder des projets artistiques, que ce soit avec notre volet de médiation culturelle, dans lequel on leur donne beaucoup d'autonomie pour pouvoir notamment acquérir d'expériences artistiques, en direction artistique, de discuter avec nos partenaires artistiques dans les autres disciplines. Donc, ça leur permet d'acquérir cette expérience de se diversifier à l'intérieur de la sphère artistique et aussi en tant que, des fois, artistes multidisciplinaires. Alors, on essaie aussi de leur insuffler cette notion-là d'entrepreneuriat parce qu'on est conscient aussi que ce n'est pas tous les musiciens qui passent par nos rangs qui visent une position dans un orchestre. Et plusieurs veulent atteindre leur propre but, ont leur propre rêve d'artistes et de musiciens. Et si on est capable de les outiller avec le plus d'expérience et d'outils, ça va être une réussite pour tout notre milieu. Parce que nous, on croit que des musiciens bien outillés contribuent à un milieu dynamique et fort. Et donc, c'est tout le milieu qui en bénéficie tout au long de la chaîne. Donc, c'est pour ça que nous, c'est important de bien les préparer à pouvoir réaliser leurs objectifs. Et par la bande, ça nous aide aussi à réaliser le nôtre parce que quand ils passent dans nos rangs, ils ont une expérience, on le souhaite, positive d'orchestre. Et on souhaite aussi que ça puisse créer des liens avec les autres orchestres et peut-être être vu aussi comme un bassin de recrutement pour les autres orchestres et continuer à développer ce milieu-là orchestral au Québec, mais aussi ailleurs au Canada. Il y a aussi cette question-là de balance, d'équilibre entre la vie professionnelle et la vie personnelle qui est très difficile à atteindre en ce moment. C'est un sujet qui revient beaucoup dans les discussions qu'on a avec certains de nos musiciens qui nous confient ces défis-là qui se présentent à eux. Et clairement, c'est quelque chose qu'on souhaite aborder dans les prochaines années, dans nos volets de formation continue et dans nos conférences, comment on peut aider les musiciens à s'outiller, à faire face à cette gestion de carrière qui est là. Et la vie personnelle aussi, qui des fois est un peu relayée au second plan parce qu'on veut atteindre nos buts, on veut se développer. On a aussi des objectifs financiers comme musicien, comme artiste, comme humain. Donc, c'est une question qui nous tient vraiment à cœur, comment qu'on va aborder ça, la question de balance entre vie privée et carrière. Donc, voilà, je retourne le microphone à mes collègues.
Merci. Okay. I remember our second topic is diversity and inclusivity, and I remember the years when Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours or whatever it was came out. That you had to do X amount of investment in what you were doing to be successful on the level of Wayne Gretzky or whatever it was they were using the example back there then. And my kids were both getting ready or in music school at that time, and I remember going back and counting, and they'd already done the 10,000 hours, right, to get in. So that the barrier to entry is quite substantial. And one of the big discussions we're having in music schools right now is who does that keep out and why? Right? So there are economic and cultural barriers to people getting into music school that are not healthy for us in the long run. And we talked a little bit in our pre-conversation about the issue around the audition process and who is that keeping out of our orchestras, and what are the demands on you as orchestras in your communities. And are the people who are getting into your orchestras ready to do the work that you need them to do, not just on the stage, but in the community? And I think that's one of the things that we're wondering about as we go forward in training. How do we prepare, as we've said, for people to do, our musicians to do more things, to have a different positionality within their communities, to reach out more? And that was one, like Abigail, one of the things that I did as composer in residence was to go into the community, to different components of the cultural part of our community in Winnipeg. I would sit in the living room of a Pakistani harmonium player and jam with him as we tried to come up with a show. I would work with the Cree drum singing group and go to their, you have to go to people's houses and meet with them and build relationships with them, which is a very different job than playing the excerpt behind a screen, And when I look at the symphony orchestras, when I go to them, I often think about who won't see themselves on the stage as a way of thinking that that's a possibility for me. And as a young composer growing up in Winnipeg, I was 17 years old before I saw a living composer, right? We were supposed to be dead, And that was just the fact. And we're much more convenient when we're dead. We don't ask questions. We don't make changes in rehearsals. It's just more convenient. I get it. And it's cheaper, because you don't have to pay a commission or whatever. You do your thing. So, but I think the world that we're going into is going to be a lot messier and a lot more about people, right? And so the blind audition process may be something that we need to rethink as we try to be more representational and we try to be more inclusive. Even the structure of our orchestras, what about those instruments who don't see themselves on the stage? So there's a lot, I think, for us to think about as we go forward about the role of the orchestra as a major component of the musical infrastructure in our communities, and how or will it be possible for orchestras to stay in that position as the foundation block? Because I started my career at the Manitoba Arts Council as the music, dance, and theater officer, and one of the things we used to justify was, yes, the Winnipeg Symphony gets the biggest grant because they provide the backbone of infrastructure for musical activity in the community. Well, if the community isn't just the Western musical community, then we have some other issues that we have to deal with. So if orchestras want to stay as the backbone, maybe we need to start thinking about who the members of the orchestra are and how they reflect the various kinds of music making in your community. I know in Vancouver, I think an awful lot about that because we have a large South Asian and Asian community, all of whom who want to come and do concerts in the Chan Center, but you can't play any of those instruments in the music school as your major, right? So we have a lot of work to do as we try and make space for all these different things to happen. So maybe I'll reverse the order and ask Marie-France to comment.
Eh bien, pour notre part, la question de la diversité n'est pas tant focalisée sur les musiciens qui sont dans nos rangs, parce que nous, on juge vraiment les candidatures sur le talent. On ne se préoccupe pas du tout d'où est-ce qu'ils viennent, de quel horizon ils nous proviennent. On est vraiment sur les candidatures, on essaie d'être le plus je vais dire, de vraiment mettre l'accent sur le talent et la question de formation aussi de nos musiciens. Et donc, nous, la diversité, c'est beaucoup plus dans la représentativité de ce qu'on offre sur la scène, dans les compositeurs, les compositrices aussi auxquelles on fait place dans notre programmation, les programmes de notre volet de médiation culturelle, en fait, qui est une série de concerts présentés au Musée de la Civilisation à Québec, en petite formation, dans lequel on essaie d'être le plus possible en phase avec nos communautés. On travaille aussi avec des personnes sourdes, donc on essaie de voir de quelle façon ils veulent faire l'expérience de la musique, et l'inclusivité pour nous est beaucoup plus de cette façon-là auprès de personnes en situation de marginalité, par exemple, que ce pourrait être auprès de nos musiciens. Alors, on le voit beaucoup plus, comme je disais, dans notre paysage musical à nous, qui offre des occasions de faire connaître, par exemple, des artistes autochtones de la nation Huron-Wendat, qui sont nos voisins avec qui on a collaboré déjà pour quelques projets. Et puis, donc, aussi, comme je disais, aussi travailler avec d'autres groupes en situation de marginalité, de leur offrir la possibilité de s'exprimer, soit sur scène ou bien de connecter avec eux pour nous parler de leur propre expérience à travers la musique.
Thank you. I really think a little bit about this experience that I had quite often when I was working at Sistema Toronto. One thing that happened really frequently is that amazing organizations would offer us free tickets to concerts. And we could bring kids down to, for instance, meet James Ennis and hear the orchestra, TSO, do an open rehearsal. And it was a really great experience. And something happened every single time I brought those kids, mostly kids of color, mostly kids from really marginalized communities like Jane Finch or East Scarborough. Something happened every time I would bring them down to those concerts or events. And that is that every time at least one kid and maybe more kids would say, Miss Christie, are we allowed to be here? Are we going to get in trouble? And it was a really, really common experience. It happened all the time. And I think for me, coming from a privileged background, being part of the crowd, really understanding that I belonged in classical music to a deep degree, it was a huge eye-opening experience for me to see that many people don't feel like they belong in our world. And I think we really need to hear that. When we say EDI or we say equity, diversity, and inclusivity, we sort of brush past the definition of those words. We really need to hear as a community that word inclusivity. We have to hear it and we have to internalize it and we have to examine within ourselves, why do folks not feel included in our community? What is it about what we do and how we operate that creates a feeling of not belonging? For a lot of people. And it's tough. It's tough to have that feeling. It was tough for me to confront that and say, oh, these kids don't feel included here. No matter what I did, all the things that I did to bring them here, they don't feel included. And actually, that's okay. And that's something that we need to interrogate and examine and change and fix. And one of the real solutions that I have found over time is what Pat was saying, really becoming more part of community. It's not enough to just say, come and meet James Ennis, the violinist. Here you go, kids. You're going to get to see a Stradivarius. It's not enough. It's a one touch point. It's not in depth. It doesn't develop a relationship. There's no continuing point of contact. And as much as we appreciated the time and effort that went into that visit, it didn't actually create a real human connection between those kids and what was happening on the stage. There's definitely the element of if they can't see it, they can't be it. There's not enough people of color on orchestral stages. It's something we really need to think about. there's not enough women conductors. There's not enough people of color as conductors. We're not seeing enough representation of composers. These are the things that I think about when I think about NYO and who's coming to NYO and why. Is it inclusive? Are we actually making changes to become inclusive as an organization and as an industry, as a community? Are we being inclusive? One of the things we used to hear, maybe not so much anymore, is, well, I don't see color, and I don't think about those things. And that is such an incredibly privileged statement to make. It's super problematic. And I think when we're thinking about things like the audition process, we want to think about how much we're incorporating that statement of, I don't see color, into our practices as organizations. Do we not see color? I think people of color experience that we do see color all the time. They don't feel included. I think women and LGBTQ+ and disabled people often feel like we don't see them and we don't accommodate them. And so it's something I would really encourage as a group to really interrogate within your organization, even within yourself. How are you actually being inclusive? How are you connecting with community? If people of color aren't coming to your concerts, or they're not showing up to your training institution, or they're not connecting with you, how much of that is your responsibility to make changes and to find ways to connect? Yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
Well, I think if we're looking at diversity in the orchestra, we have to just look beyond the music that's being programmed, because those composers, those pieces you're programming, those composers are not with your organization, right? They're something that you're just doing and then they're gone. That's it. So with our composer fellowship program, we try to get a balance. Yes, we have some white composers. We also have, Brazilian, from Guyana, Mexico, Métis. It's a mix, because the people that apply to us are a mix. One thing I will throw out there, and you might not like this, but I think, programming music of contemporary composers based on their skin color and their culture is great to get balance into the scene. I mean, it needs to happen, no question. But only based on that and not musical quality can be a bit like tokenism. And, I've heard this from composers, from one example specifically, a composer was from Iran, and he called me and said, I need to talk to you. Do you think I got this position because of the color of my skin? Is my music good? They start not to trust it and start to think they're just being programmed because of that. So I would encourage orchestras to go deeper into your organization and try to get diversity within it, not just what you're programming on stage.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, here we go. I have so many thoughts around this, and I'm trying to organize my thoughts. So if I don't, I apologize. I think I'd like to start off by saying, is this on? Okay, yeah, I can't. It's weird. Sorry. You don't go where you're not welcome. So if you're looking at your audience and you're not seeing people that look like me or people of color, they don't feel welcome. You don't go where you don't feel welcome. I always say that because I have a doctorate in music and I've studied a lot of music and I've played a lot. So I can rest on that. Coming to an orchestra concert, I can rest that, okay, these people in ball gowns or whatever that are very fancy, they're not hearing what I'm hearing. Because I have that knowledge and that I have that privilege as well too. But I can very clearly look around and see that other people don't have that similar privilege. So just considering that, you don't go where you're not welcome. And also in that training aspect, we talk about getting people of color into orchestras. Support's also needed once you're in the orchestra. And I think that's forgotten hugely, and it's been forgotten. I'm going to speak from my experience. It's been forgotten completely. It's like, oh, great, we have a black clarinetist. He's here. He's going to play. He's going to throw down, great. But the microaggressions that you get from maybe other people in the orchestra, from conductors, and then I'm supposed to play, I don't know, some big solo, while also feeling like, okay, I'm the only black person in this orchestra. And I feel the microaggressions from all different areas, and then I'm supposed to play with surgical precision. How long am I going to stay there? Right? So I think diversity, equity, inclusion training for orchestra members and staff is absolutely necessary. If there are enough people, I know when I was at University of Virginia, they had a Black faculty cohort, a group where we could get together and talk, basically. That's not possible at a lot of orchestras because it would be one person sitting in a room by themselves, right? So I just want to really reiterate that support while a person is in the orchestra, is in that role, the level of stress that they're feeling already because they have to play Beethoven 6 excerpt, right? But then also the microaggressions that come from other people in the orchestra, from administration maybe at times, from societal things that are going on. It's not a place someone wants to stay and they don't feel welcome. So I would really kind of like put that in everyone's mind, because I think that's often forgotten. You get a person who is diverse and then, okay, our work's done. Great. They're going to play and they're going to meet the community and it's going to be great. It's not going to happen. I would also say in terms of programming, take a risk. Really take a risk where art institutions, and I think that's what we should be doing. I always say we're an art institution, not a museum, if that makes sense. So with programming, take a risk. Even acknowledging if you are taking a risk, let's acknowledge it as well too. Let's make the program title reflect that risk. Or maybe it's not even a risk. Maybe programming a program of all Black composers isn't a risk at all. But I would say take those risks that feel like risks. Because I know oftentimes you're looking at, well, Beethoven sells. Well, great. William Grant still sounds a lot like Brahms at times, you know. Samuel Coleridge Taylor also sounds a lot like Brahms, you know. And there's entry points. I always say, especially in teaching, there's no concept that's too advanced for any audience. It's just how you present it. So how are you presenting it? That might be a venue change. That might be a pre-concert talk. It might be going into the community beforehand. But how you're presenting it, I think you can take those risks and just really think outside of the box. I don't know what I wrote. And then just about that element of being part of the community, that's an element, I think, of diversifying things. But I think foundationally, we have to look at like education systems and how starting from junior kindergarten right through until you finish your doctorate. What does that look like in music education, and what kind of tools, what does diversity, equity, inclusion look like through that whole process? And I think that's how, and it's a longer road, it's a longer runway than just programming or diverse composers, but it's a much longer road to our orchestras looking like our community. We often say that in education, our schools are a reflection of our community. Our orchestras are not a reflection of our community. So yeah, really thinking of education, music education as a tool and as a way to make our orchestras and our audiences more diverse.
Thanks. I'll make just another couple of comments because we haven't used the other D word, which is decolonization. And that's a really serious issue. As an Indigenous person who was part of the scoop, I was taken from my family and placed with a white family. I was completely colonized. I have a PhD in music, you know, can't be much more colonized than that, you know, and at a big American school, so they didn't care about any of the other stuff that we sometimes talk about here in Canada. But coming back, I mean, I'm a member of a very small group of Indigenous musicians who do classical music. And just to give you an idea, we were approached, a group of us were approached, I think a dozen of us, for very small commissions, 3-minute commissions. 3 days before the deadline, we all got sent a request to be part of this project. Well, pretty much we all know each other. We started an email group going like, has anyone talked to this group? Why are we being asked for 3-minute pieces? Why is it 3 days before the thing? Do we really want to be involved with this group if that's how they do their planning? So think about it. I know that you're all being asked to connect to Indigenous and diverse communities. You have to give up control. That's the only way to make it work. The musicians that you're going to work with have to be in from the beginning. It will make you work a different way. It's the only way that it will be successful. It's a sharing process. It's a making space. It's a completely different way of doing business. The hierarchical orchestral structure with the artistic director at the top will not work. It's going to have to change. And I think, as a person who's been involved with orchestras and musical community, Western music for my whole life, I think that it's a good step for us all. You know, that to be a living art form is what we want to be. Yes, we all honor the history, as almost all of our different diverse communities honor the histories that they come from. We all bring these things to the table. We want to honor them together, but it means that we're making a new path and a new culture together. Okay, so, and off my soapbox for a second. The last thing that we want to talk about a little bit is financial support for training and how orchestras can be more involved. Because I think we've all identified a bit of a gap between where what we do ends and where your professional world begins or your community world begins. So there's now a kind of need, I think, for whatever kind of on-the-job work training, more experiential learning, more of a foothold where there are apprentices or musicians who are trying to figure out how they fit into this community differently. I mean, we certainly experienced it on the composer side of bringing composers in and making them the Canada Council Composer in Residence program, I think was quite successful in many places in terms of finding a new way for orchestras to work with living composers. I think now we need to go beyond that to our young folk who are graduating out of formal programs but still are taking, and there's a gap there. I see it probably more in opera, that there are more formal structures in opera to kind of create this young artist in residence or some bridging program, and that there's a need for funding, there's a need for structure, there's a need for us all to work together to try and figure out how to make that, to close that gap in such a way that young people have a better shot at being successful when they get into that professional world. And then I think we still, as you said, there needs to be support for our new entries into the professional world once they get there, because it is very different from the experience that they're used to in their training.
Just generally around financial support and training, there just seems to be a disconnect to me between what the orchestra is delivering and what society generally needs. And there just seems to be a hole there, and that's that gap, I would say, as well, too, in training orchestral musicians or training musicians in general. When I see a program like I did an education degree, great. I left that and went right into teaching. My partner is an engineer, went through engineer school, and then and now is an engineer. That doesn't happen in music, and there's this strange disconnect there. I'm not sure if that's on the fault of the orchestra, or fault's maybe a poor word, but if that's on the orchestra or it's on the university or the training institution. But there's that disconnect there, and I think that comes from what society actually needs from our organization. And once we can determine what society and culture needs from an orchestra, then we can train accordingly. So it almost seems like we're training in an older style, in an older style. And then all of a sudden you finish school and you're like me after your master's and like, amazing reeds. I can play all my scales at 160, whatever. Nobody's hiring me, right? But so that disconnect, because maybe society doesn't care that I can play all of my skills and I have great reeds. But if I could maybe play with passion and had entrepreneurial skills and also could I don't know, do something else, maybe it would be a bit more meaningful to society. So I think we need to kind of project forward, and recognizing, I especially think about government funding. That's social, that's our community funding, right? So our orchestra needs to really reflect that for more even money to come that way. But it's not doing that right now, and it almost seems like we're stuck spinning our wheels, and that gap is the primary thing, and we see that in the training, we see that in the people in the orchestras, and we see that the funding that's received.
Okay, well, this is a big question, and I'll try to address a few things. For one thing, I think students coming out of university programs don't understand how arts organizations work. They don't know how orchestras work. Orchestras are sort of this mythical creature that everybody wants into, but nobody knows how they function. So I think part of it is opening the doors. And I mean, we have sessions with all of our staff members, so our composer fellows get to know who does what, understand how the board works, and their participation in this whole not-for-profit art scene. So that's part of it. I would think that many organizations could open up their doors without actually much funding. We're talking about funding here. I mean, in our situation, it helps that I'm the one guiding the program and can mentor the composers. But I mean, we just went on a field trip a couple weeks ago to Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony, and they opened their doors, and in we went. It was great. So there's definitely a need for that, and it doesn't cost any money. There are some things you can do. As far as funding, I mean, we had funding from RBC. That's ending. The way we run our program is that the composers are basically given the money for a commission, and then and a little bit extra, and all of that includes their time and their travel, and they're with us for basically a concert season. So it's not a massive amount of money, and then you can also partner too to kind of help spread the word. So we have a partner with the Canadian Music Centre. They get the call out. They do some promotion for the composers afterwards and interview them, and spread the word about the program. Again, that doesn't cost $1. So using your resources in your area is certainly beneficial. So I think it can be done on a relatively small amount of money. What if there are internship positions within the orchestra for players, and they're getting paid like the orchestra players, like you would hire extras? That's another thing. It's great to hear that National Arts Centre Orchestra has a program now, 3 weeks long, training program for orchestra players. So we can all do these things, I think, on a smaller level to open the door, and then I think you'll find it's great. It's not so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Incremental change, small changes. Things don't have to change overnight. I think, yeah, absolutely. Also, mentoring is such a big part of how you can support young people. If you think for yourself personally, can you just make a little bit of time, maybe even once a month, to spend some time with a young person who's passionate, who's excited, who wants to be part of things? Go for coffee, have a lunch, pay the bill. They really, they need that support, and it can be so helpful to encourage a young person. I think about people who did that for me early on in my career, and I think it's really important for us to all make the time. I know everybody's so busy, but if you can make the time to mentor, it can make a big difference. The other thing is, I think we are looking possibly also at a systemic issue around access to music careers. So, if we're being realistic, a lot of folks who get careers in music, or young people who are able to kind of continue on, are people whose socioeconomic status is a little bit stronger. And so what are the systemic issues around access to careers in music? How can we all advocate for better access? How can we build systems of support? So those kinds of things don't get built overnight. It can take a long time, but incrementally we can make changes as we go along. And some of that is something we need to do at a government level, at a societal level, to find out ways that we can, especially from a socioeconomic point of view, open things up so that it's more possible for someone who comes from a lower income background to actually make a go of it. If your parents can't pay your rent for a few years, or chip in on your phone bill, or those kinds of things, it just starts to become impossible. So really recognizing that is the case right now is the first step. I think we don't talk about it very much. I think it's difficult, right, to recognize that that's kind of the case for a lot of young people. But I think acknowledging that is the first step, and then working to make opportunities and to talk about the money, because rent is expensive, groceries are expensive. I think we're embarrassed to talk about the money side of things, and it's really to the detriment of our whole industry that we do. If we can talk about it and say, hey, here's how we can make a go of it for you, can make a really big difference.
Oui, bien, je rebondis sur ça, effectivement, des défis de la carrière en musique et de la jeune carrière en musique. En fait, c'est toute la chaîne de l'éducation musicale, de la formation musicale qui a besoin de soutien financier. On voit bien dans les jonctions entre les différents paliers de formation musicale, que ce soit de passer du cégep à l'université ou au conservatoire, ou même par la suite à la maîtrise ou au doctorat ou à la carrière professionnelle. On perd toujours des musiciens, de très bons musiciens. C'est pas faute de talent, c'est certainement souvent par faute de ressources financières pour pouvoir continuer, poursuivre. Et souvent aussi, quand on se retrouve entre deux chaises, si on peut dire comme ça, entre deux paliers de formation qui parfois ne nous permettent pas d'aller accéder à du soutien financier, c'est là qu'est le creux qui est le plus pertinent à regarder pour financer et soutenir nos musiciens et les artistes de la relève. Les supporter, c'est pas juste d'aller chercher des subventions pour eux, parce que notamment les majorités des grands programmes de subvention n'ont pas comme vocation de supporter l'émergence ou les musiciens en développement de carrière, mais bien ceux qui sont déjà un peu établis, qui ont déjà une feuille de route, ce qui fait que ça devient vraiment difficile pour des musiciens d'avoir accès déjà à du financement gouvernemental pour développer leur carrière. Il existe déjà quelques programmes ici et là avec parfois des municipalités, des villes pour des artistes en émergence, mais c'est encore assez ciblé, pas assez varié, aussi en termes de critères et de faisabilité de projet. Donc, des fois, c'est pas toujours qu'on a besoin de produire un concert pour lequel on doit être soutenu, mais des fois, c'est d'arriver d'être soutenu pour l'achat d'un instrument qui va être significatif dans notre carrière aussi. Et donc, on sort de l'université, on sort du conservatoire, on est déjà plein de dettes d'études, dettes d'achat d'instruments professionnels, et puis on essaie de se lancer dans une carrière qui nécessite du temps et de la gestion et de l'investissement de nous-mêmes. Donc, très rapidement, on peut comprendre que des besoins financiers et des défis se présentent devant nous. Il y a des programmes de formation professionnelle qui existent du côté artistique, mais encore là, le soutien financier qu'un artiste peut aller chercher est assez mince pour pouvoir avoir accès à des formations continues. On ne parle pas ici d'académique, mais on parle bien de programmes de formation continue, comme un peu ce que nous, on offre. Et c'est aussi un grand défi pour les organisations artistiques professionnelles d'avoir du soutien financier gouvernemental, notamment pour justement nos formations, notre formation continue. C'est quelque chose avec lequel on se débat, nous, depuis déjà quelques années à faire reconnaître, mais les critères généraux ne sont pas axés sur un organisme professionnel qui dispense de la formation continue, mais bien plus sur un volet académique ou un camp d'été, par exemple, musical pour la jeunesse. Donc, c'est là qu'il est important pour nous de rallier le milieu artistique et d'allumer cette conscience-là envers les défis des jeunes émergents, notamment en encourageant le mentorat. On voit que de plus en plus d'orchestres au Québec qui offrent quelques volets de mentorat, quelques initiatives ici et là pour mentorer les musiciens. C'est des initiatives qui sont rémunérées, ce qui est vraiment bien reçu de la part des musiciens, parce que d'une part, ça leur permet de continuer à prendre l'expérience, mais aussi de recevoir un soutien financier pour le faire, parce que la plupart des formations que l'on fait, ce sont des formations que l'on paye nous-mêmes, que ce soit dans des académies d'été, des masterclass, des cours privés. C'est encore un investissement de notre argent pour une formation continue qui est souvent pas très bien supportée ici et là par les divers fonds, que ce soit privés ou publics. Alors, c'est une question qui est bien lancée aux orchestres. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour soutenir encore plus les musiciens? Est-ce que ça va par continuer de créer des programmes de mentorat subventionnés, supportés financièrement, par la création de bourses aussi? Il y a toujours tout plein d'options qui peuvent s'offrir à nous du moment où est-ce que le milieu s'assoit et puisse discuter avec les musiciens aussi parce que c'est eux qui ont la clé de la solution sur leurs besoins. Qu'est-ce qu'ils vivent? On peut prétendre savoir, mais en fait, la discussion est vraiment importante dans ce cas-là pour comprendre les besoins et les défis qu'ils vivent et comment nous, on peut s'ajuster pour les soutenir. Parce que d'un autre côté, soutenir cette relève-là, c'est investir dans votre prochaine relève, dans vos propres musiciens qui vont venir joindre vos rangs dans quelques années. Ici, c'est un élément qu'on ne prend pas soin tout au long de la chaîne de formation, que ce soit déjà depuis le cégep ou le collège, l'université, le conservatoire, jusqu'à la sortie, les premières années de carrière. On voit déjà qu'on perd des musiciens tout le long de la route et qu'est-ce qui nous reste au bout pour combler les rangs des orchestres ou même encore du milieu musical, au niveau des productions, de toutes les initiatives qui se passent. Alors, c'est là-dessus que nous, on encourage beaucoup la réflexion et la discussion aussi avec les musiciens, entre les divers organismes culturels, les orchestres, les producteurs, pour arriver ensemble à mieux soutenir cette incertitude-là financière chez les jeunes musiciens et tout au long de leur formation.
Merci, merci. I think when we talked, we see big changes in our world of music training, and they're just coming your way. Hopefully not probably a tsunami. That's what we're all dealing with these days. So hopefully this has covered some of the things that you have thought about. Hopefully you'll get some new ideas of things that you might do or ways to think about how to change things as you go forward. I want to thank the panel. It's been wonderful to work with them, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to chat and answer questions throughout the rest of the day. So thank you all very much.